Back in the old days, Nneka, owned a successful bakery in Lagos. My shop was known for its sweet-smelling bread, fluffy cakes, and perfectly spiced chin-chin. Business was good, my family was happy, and my heart was full. But one fateful evening, just before closing, an old woman hobbled into my shop. Her wrapper was faded, her face lined with age, and her eyes sharp like they could see straight into my soul. "I wish to buy a dozen puff-puffs," she said, pointing to the golden, round pastries stacked neatly on a tray. I counted out 12 and placed them in a paper bag. The old woman frowned. "Only 12?" she asked. I sighed, immediately understanding what she meant. Some bakers in town followed the custom of giving an extra portion, but I saw no reason to do so. What kind of businesswoman would give away her hard work for free? "A dozen is 12, Mama," I replied firmly. "And that is what I have given you." Her eyes glinted in the dim candlelight. "I asked for a dozen, not 12. I shook my head. "I have a family to feed. If I start giving away my puff-puffs, who will take care of them?" "A dozen is 12, Mama. Take it or leave it." She studied me for a long moment, then simply nodded and left the shop, empty-handed. That night, the winds changed. The next morning, I opened my shop to find my bread missing from the shelves, stolen without a trace. The next day, my cakes refused to rise, sinking into sad, flat layers. By the end of the week, my puff-puffs either burned black or were so raw inside they dripped butter when broken apart. At first, I blamed my workers. I checked my ingredients, changed my flour, adjusted my ovens, and nothing worked. It wasn't until I saw my ajij bread rising so high it floated out of the oven and up into the sky that I knew something was terribly wrong. Then I remembered the old woman. The next week, she returned, her steps slow but steady. "I will have a dozen of your puff-puffs," she said. Fury boiled in my chest. Did she dare show her face in my shop after the misfortune she had brought upon me? "No, Mama," I spat. "Not today, not ever." She left without another word. That was when my true suffering began. My chin-chin crumbled to dust, my meat pies soured, and my customers, those who had been loyal for years, stopped coming. They whispered that my shop was cursed, that I had angered the spirits. Even my workers abandoned me. But I was stubborn. I would not be broken by an old woman's tricks. When she returned a third time, I pointed to the door. "Go away, Mama," I said through gritted teeth. "I don't have anything for you." She sighed, shook her head, and left. After that, everything I baked was a disaster. My family and I were the only ones left eating my food, and even they began to grow tired of my failures. My money dwindled. My hope faded. One night, I locked up my empty shop and went to church. I knelt before the altar and prayed to Saint Nicholas, the patron of merchants, begging for mercy. "Help me, Saint Nicholas," I whispered. "I am losing everything. Show me what to do." The next morning, I forced myself to bake one last batch of St. Nicholas cookies, the special ones I always made in December. As I placed them in the oven, I held my breath. Would they burn? Would they crumble? To my shock, they came out perfect, golden, soft, and sweet. As I stared at them in awe, I felt a presence. I looked up and there, in the middle of my shop, stood a man dressed simply in white. His beard was long, his eyes filled with kindness, and though he wore no grand robes, I knew him at once. Saint Nicholas. My knees trembled, and I sat down heavily on a stool. His voice was gentle but firm. All my life, I gave to those in need, cared for the suffering, and shared what I had with others. God has been generous to us, should we not be generous in return? Tears burned my eyes. Is an extra puff such a terrible price to pay for all that God has given you? He asked softly. Before I could answer, he was gone. Just then, the door creaked open. The old woman had returned. I would like a dozen puffs, she said. I stood up, heart pounding. Slowly, I counted out 13 puffs and placed them in her bag. For you, Mama, I said, bowing my head. She nodded briskly. The spell is broken. Then, with a knowing smile, she added, from now on, a dozen is 13. From that day onward, I gave generously, to my customers, to the poor, and to my family. And in my bakery, a dozen was always, then forever, 13.